95 KQDS.
It is 7:44 at Classic Rock KQ. Tom Maher, the director of the Minnesota chapter of MUFON. Do you think the aliens look down at us sometimes and they're like, that's just total flyover land? Why are we even bothering with them?
Well, I think there's a bit of curiosity. I'm sure they're wondering what the heck we're up to. So I think they probably look at us as being very peculiar from their perspective. So
yeah, peculiar is probably a very polite way of putting it. Tom is here. Tom is here with us about once a month or thereabouts to discuss all things regarding UFOs, and I guess UAPs is what the government goes with now, unidentified aerial phenomenon, not only here in the great state of Minnesota, but all over the place. And we were texting early this morning. You said there's a new NASA report. I didn't have my thumb on the pulse, but there's a new NASA report out, or it's coming out. Is that correct?
They did a press conference. I think it was yesterday. It was live. I didn't get a chance to watch it myself, so I'm going to probably try to go online and check the replay. But I guess part of it is they're trying to kind of shift the way people perceive this. I think part of it, I saw a little blurb comment about it. They're trying to get people to stop mocking and ridiculing people who've had experiences, I think. I haven't seen it, but that's kind of what I got. So NASA apparently did some sort of press conference yesterday, and I'm going to have to check that out. So,
you know, they've said... Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, going back to us being flyover country, one thing that occurred to me is a lot of times I'll hear people talk about one of the things that they supposedly they find very interesting about human beings is, this might sound weird to us, but human beings have emotions. And a lot of times you'll hear that extraterrestrials seem to be very non-emotional. So it sounds like they actually don't have that emotional quality we have, and they find it very fascinating and appealing about us that we have these emotions that are, no pun intended or pun intended, actually alien to them. So that's one thing that they're really curious about, our creativity and our emotions.
Why do you think, especially in this day and age when so much more information is available to us, and the government has even come out and said, look, we can narrow down and identify what the majority of this stuff is, but we're going to be honest with you, there are a couple things here. The technology is unlike anything we've seen before. We're pretty sure our enemies don't possess this type of technology. We actually have video evidence, blah, blah. Why is the stigma still such that if you talk about seeing something like this, people are going to think you're a whack job?
Well, I think it's kind of an in-crowd, out-crowd kind of thing, and as long as you stay in the in-crowd, you're safe from ridicule and you're protected, but as soon as you go into the out-crowd, then you're kind of in danger of that. So as long as you stay with the majority is kind of a safe place to be, whether it in a bigger picture makes sense or not. The majority is always a safer spot for people, I think, psychologically and physically and all that other stuff. So.
Well, it'll be interesting to do some reading up on this latest NASA UFO panel and comb through the information. I can kind of predict what's going to happen. They're going to, without even looking at it, they're going to come out and say, well, you know, most of it we can certainly tell you what it is. But, you know, maybe there just might be a little something, just enough to keep people hanging on and keep them interested. Do you agree?
Yeah, and the one thing I think they really want to avoid is really saying that it's beyond them or they don't know about it because, again, back to that safety thing, people want to be calm and safe, and as long as they feel like the government knows and the government understands it and it's all figured, as long as the government's in control, they're safe. But for the government to come out and say, hey, we have no idea what this is, we have no idea what's going on, we can't stop it, we can't control it, that introduces a level of fear into people, and they don't want people to be in that fear, so they want to keep it, they want to keep it kind of mild and more palatable for the people, I think.
So we are up against the clock a bit as it is on this show. So let's get right into this case from 1979. And it's one of those, you talk about how you can explain away a good majority of the stuff. But this is one of those, and I think you'll agree, once you dig into it, there's a lot that is unexplainable here, and it's a head-scratcher. It happened in Warren, Minnesota back on August 27th of 1979. If you wouldn't mind detailing the story a little bit, Tom.
Yeah. It's one of the stories that still draws people from around the country all the way up to Warren, Minnesota, to see what's commonly known as the UFO car. So it involves Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson. And Val has had a great reputation as a sheriff, very meticulous, very by the book. Every time he started his shift, he would check the clock at the headquarters. He'd synchronize that to his watch, and he'd synchronize his watch to his patrol car. So All three clocks were synchronized always, and that was just the thing he did. He was driving around near the North Dakota border around 1:40 a.m., and he saw through his side window a really, really bright light, which he estimated was probably about 8 to 12 inches across, but it seemed to be kind of high up off the ground to be a car. He said he thought it was like 3 or 4 feet off the ground. So he thought maybe it was like a plane that had come in for an emergency landing or something like that. So he turned onto the side road because he really wanted to get a better look at it. And he said it was approximately 1.5 miles away, and almost instantaneously, it was literally, as he described it, on top of him. And he heard the sound of shattering glass, and then he lost consciousness. Well, about at 2:19 a.m., he radioed headquarters, asking for assistance. And another officer and an ambulance rushed out there. They found his squad car had skidded off the road. It left skid marks, about 90, almost 100 feet of skid marks, and it was kind of turned sideways. And they found Val to be in a state of shock, and they took him in, and they examined his eyes, and they said his eyes had what they describe as like mild welder's burn. So if you're a welder, if you're not using your protective lenses, you can damage your eyes. It kind of looked like he had mild welder's burns in his eyes, and he really couldn't stand to be exposed to bright lights. And another thing that was peculiar was his watch and his squad car were still synced, but they were now 14 minutes off of what the headquarters clock was. So now there's 14 minutes of what's referred to as missing time, so this block of missing time there. And the damage on the car was really peculiar. So it's a Ford LTD. And you can think back, the headlights on those, there's headlights on either side, and there's 2 on the left and 2 on the right. All the damage kind of occurred on the driver's side. So take those 2 headlights that are on the driver's side. The inside one was shattered. The one to the outside was just fine. And then kind of going in a straight line up the hood of the car, there was like impact marks, but there was a circular disc impact about 1.5 inches wide. And then when you got to the windshield was cracked from bottom to top in a straight line with what appeared to be 4 different impact sites going up the top. And the patrol cars back then, they had an antenna over on the hood on the passenger side, then an antenna on the top of the car, then an antenna on the trunk of the car. So the impact went up the windshield, and then on the antenna on the top of the car was bent at like a 60-degree angle, about 6 inches above the car. And then if you go back to the trunk of the car, that antenna was bent at a 90-degree angle, but only up at the very top of the car. So there's some very peculiar damage, and experts from Ford Motor Company came out, and experts from Honeywell came out to examine the damage of the car, and they were really puzzled by the impacts on the windshield because the best they could tell, so there's 4 impact points going up in a straight line right in front of the driver. They say it looks like these 4 impact points, the impact came from both the inside and the outside of the car at the same time. So they can't really explain these very unique cracks that are in the windshield. And they were actually very, very close to taking the car in and getting it restored and putting it back on the road. And at the very last minute, someone said, hang on a second. This could be evidence, and it could be really important. So let's not restore the car. Let's keep it in as it is. So they ended up putting the car up in the museum in Warren, Minnesota. And like I said, it still draws people from around the country to Warren, Minnesota to see the UFO car. So you can go up there and see it. You can check it out. It's been examined many times, but it's very peculiar, very unusual. And at the time, Val wasn't convinced it was a UFO. He didn't, because if you think about UFOs, people think this big disc object. And so he didn't think it was a UFO. And he's kind of changed that now. He does feel it's a UFO, but still doesn't know what it was. He continued working in the same area for a while. Then he moved to another part of Minnesota, was a sheriff there, and now he's retired. He lives over in Wisconsin, and he really was never looking for the attention. He really kind of wished the whole story would go away. But for a long time, he'd have people coming to his house and knocking on his door, and he was a very polite, very kind, very courteous guy. He'd sit out on the porch with them, and they'd just ask him questions, so he'd just answer all the questions. And after a while, they stopped asking the questions, and the people that were showing up at his door, they just wanted to hear his story. So then he was telling his story, and they wanted to share their story. So he was listening to their story. He would just let them talk themselves out, and then let them go on their way. But he wishes the whole thing never happened. He really wants to be left alone, but he's very, very curious, very congenial, and very polite to anyone who shows up asking about the UFO thing. So you got to really bless him for that, for really putting up with all his attention that he didn't want to get. He's been on Good Morning America and lots of other shows talking about that, more back in the late 70s, early 80s about that. But, yeah, so that's one of the more interesting cases from Minnesota, where you can still go to Warren, Minnesota, go to the museum and see the UFO car. And they still roll it out occasionally for different events, but it's up in the museum for anyone to take a look at. A piece of UFO history in Minnesota.
Yeah, you look at this car and the damage on it. There are some consistencies. You look at the marks going up the hood onto the windshield, but then you look at that antenna, and it's bent. The front antenna is bent in the opposite direction where it appeared the light or whatever it was heading. So it is quite peculiar. And I know that somebody from the press more recently, and it could be within the past 5-10 years or whatever, tried to catch up with Val. Actually, it was pretty recent because that naval footage came out, and Mr. Johnson basically said, I really hope that as more evidence comes to light that this will add validity to my story and my statement, and people don't think that I'm a crackpot, because I'm not. And, you know, you can't help but feel for the guy a little bit, because nobody wants to bring this kind of attention upon themselves, and they don't want to live with this kind of notoriety, but for whatever reason, he was chosen to have to carry this burden, and he's done so, it appears, with class and dignity. But it's got to get old after a while, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, because it was Channel 5 down here in the Twin Cities that went out there, and they interviewed me. I think they went on another him that interviewed me. So, it's old. He'd like it to go away. But another interesting thing about those antennas, if you think back to antennas on cars back in the 70s at that, there was the antenna, but at the base, there'd be this big spring. So if it were to hit something, the spring would bend before the antenna would bend. So really, to bend the antenna at those points at a 90-degree and a 60-degree angle, it's almost like you had to have like two hands bending it, or some type of force that wouldn't affect the spring at the bottom, but could still bend the antenna at the top. So, yeah, really strange stuff. But, yeah, Val's very congenial, very polite. But, yeah, it's old. He wishes it would go away. So.
This has been Tom Maher. He is the director of the Minnesota chapter of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. Tom, we'll chat with you again next month. If people want to find out more about your organization, how do they track you down?
Yeah, the global organization is www.mufon.com. And, of course, our local chapter website is www.mnmufon.org. We're working on updating the website. I know it looks really bad now, but you can contact us there, and we're working hard on updating the website. But that's what it is for now. And, yeah, that's probably the two best ways to go.
Tom, thanks for the story and the info. We'll talk to you here in a few weeks.
Sounds good. Take care, man.
All right, see ya. There goes Tom Maher, ladies and gentlemen.